So, on paper, almost all of the most nutrient-dense foods are actually animal foods. These include organ meats, eggs, bivalves like oysters, small fish like sardines and mackerel, salmon, and beef. However, when you look at the research and actually look at a lot of the correlative studies, which is a study used to draw a conclusion about how a specific variable affects some sort of end outcome. These studies point to the idea that in the U.S., populations with the highest meat consumption typically have the lowest lifespan and the greatest onset of chronic disease. Additionally, these studies seem to demonstrate that vegetarians and vegans have the longest, healthiest lives. And now the reason for this is something called the healthy user bias. So before the 1950s, you'd actually find quite the opposite. Most of the healthiest people actually had a lower carbohydrate, higher fat diet. However, in the 1950s, there was a hypothesis that it was dietary fat that was causing a lot of chronic disease. Therefore, the idea to limit animal food consumption as much as possible and shift the diet more towards a vegetarian or vegan diet was what was being recommended in all of the food guidelines. And now, as more data comes out in the 21st century, we're starting to realize that these recommendations weren't necessarily correct. And the most nutrient-dense foods still are animal products. And there really is no strong correlation between eating high-quality animal products in isolation and any sort of adverse health outcome. There are societies in which their natural diet is mostly animal products and it doesn't have much plant matter. And these individuals are extremely healthy. However, they're not eating things like hot dogs and French fries or chicken fingers with biscuits and mac and cheese. They're eating things like fresh fish and fresh game meat, and fresh eggs and even raw milk. However, in America, this is not the case. Because the guidelines have promoted that the healthiest way of eating is actually going to be more of a vegan and plant-based way of eating, people that are focused on improving their health are going to follow these recommendations. Additionally, they're probably going to follow other recommendations, like the recommendations for the daily and weekly amount of exercise, and recommendations to limit any sort of toxin and drug exposure, and recommendations for proper sleep and all the other things that go into a healthier lifestyle. And the people that are choosing to go against what the guidelines say and eat a lot of animal source foods likely aren't going to be eating fresh steak and fresh fish. And they almost certainly aren't going to be purposefully eating organ meats for their nutrient value. And while some people do this, the majority of Americans that eat a very high quantity of meat are typically consuming some of the things that I just mentioned, including a lot of deep fried and fried meat. And it's not the meat itself that's harmful, but it's everything that is put on it and everything that comes on the side. And they do this knowing that it's not a healthy practice. And they likely aren't implementing many other healthy practices within their life. I think a pretty good secondary analysis of a lot of these studies is finding the correlation between sedentary lifestyle or even smoking with the amount of meat consumption. And you could assume that these variables would be correlated much more tightly with meat consumption than a very vegetable-based diet. And this really comes down to the dietary recommendations that have been put out over the last 70 or so years. And the only reason I say this is that a lot of people have a very difficult time changing their minds, because there simply is a study that will tell you any conclusion that you want to come to. But it's becoming more and more clear every single day that animal products are abundant in nutrients. They contain the most bioavailable form of nutrients and the most diverse array of nutrients. And they also have the most digestible, diverse, and abundant essential amino acid profile, meaning they certainly are a superior protein source. However, in order to get all of these qualities, we do need to be eating the quality sources of meat and making sure we're not eating a bunch of other inflammatory and unhealthy foods that are going to offset any benefits that we get from eating meat. And in doing so, we can help change what some of these correlative statistics are showing.